Hi, it's time for another Rittenhouse RCM4 video. In this video, I'm going to attempt to explain this. This is a Rittenhouse model IR7X SubMaster. This will be somewhat complicated to explain because mostly two things. One, I have no real-world first-hand experience in the field on any installation that incorporates something like this, and also because the thinking behind this is 1960s thinking, not 2024 thinking. Some of the way Rittenhouse designed some of this, while it may have been cutting edge in 1961, kind of complicated in 2024. Before we get into this, now let's do it this way. Let's talk about this briefly, or the idea behind a SubMaster. They made two different SubMasters. And this is a new old stock unit that a customer sent to me along with his master stations to be repaired. And this is a copy of the original installation sheet that came with it. And it addresses both the IR7 and the IR7X, which is this one. They're both called SubMasters, and the difference between them is the IR7, which I guess would be the standard SubMaster, has connections here, which are A, B, and C, the three little ones that are vertical, and then next to it are two sockets that are labeled as 8 and 9, and then there's a big socket here with a single pin. So let's talk about that first. So on the back of the RCM4 master station, and I will put a pop-up thing up here to a video about the back of an RCM4 master station so you can see what that's about, because I don't want to have to rehash all of that again. There are sockets on the back of an RCM4 master station that are labeled A, B, and C. In fact, there are two sets of them for A, B, and C, because according to the installation instructions, which I have a copy of also, you can have up to two SubMaster stations on an RCM4 system. No more than that, just two. One of the ideas behind this, I think, is that this works as a standard remote station for the RCM4 system. It has both radio and intercom, but it also gives you a spot that you can connect two remote stations, to additional remote stations to it, which would be stations 8 and 9. It says in the installation instructions that if you use these sockets 8 and 9 on the back of the IR7 SubMaster, you are not allowed to use the sockets 8 and 9 on the back of the RCM4 master station. You cannot double them up. I would assume that the idea behind this, in some respects, was that you could use less cabling. Let's say, for instance, that this was going to be in the master bedroom, and then across the hallway from the master bedroom were two standard bedrooms. The distance between the standard bedrooms and this station would be a lot shorter than from the standard bedrooms all the way back through the other end of the house to where the master station was. Although, if you think about it, you have to buy three cables that run from this for the A, B, and C sockets all the way back to the master station. So are you gaining anything? Are you saving any? I don't think so. What does a SubMaster do? Well, you'll see it has all these switches here, and these switches, as near as I can tell, because I can't find any information that explains precisely how you use this. It's not in the installation instructions. It's probably in an owner's manual somewhere, but I don't have a copy of the owner's manual, and I haven't been able to find one, and I don't know anybody who has one. But these switches, I think, mimic the switches on the RCM4 master station, which we're going to look at in a second. They're labeled as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and this one says M station. That would be for the master station. And then you have ENT, which is entry off or entry on. And these first 5 switches are 3-position switches. You have on, center is off, and right is on. And this would be, if you move it this way, number 1 is on, this would be off, and this would be number 4 is on. So the switches have dual settings. 1, 2, 3 are on the left, and 4, 5, 6 are on the right, which seems kind of complicated. And that's part of that 1961 thinking, I think. Because unless you were really, really up on this back in the day, explaining to a new homeowner who just moved into a house with a system like this that you just installed seems like an uphill push to me, but I could be wrong. So I'm not exactly sure. It seems complicated. Now, back to this one. This is an IR7X SubMaster, and an IR7X SubMaster is somewhat different. If we turn it around, because we've got the real deal, so we can look at the back of it. If you look at the back of it, you've got 3 sockets here and 3 sockets here, and these are A, B, and C, and this is also A, B, and C. We'll talk about the big one in a second. The way this was intended to be used is you would have to get the 3 different cables that run from A, B, and C here and run back to the RCM4 master station, and then this would work as a standard remote, and then you could daisy chain off of this with 3 more cables to another SubMaster, which would be a standard IR7, which also has the sockets for 8 and 9. Again, it seems overly complicated to me, but I'm not from 1961, so maybe it's me. So let's talk about the big pin. So the big pin has positions on it from 1 through 9, because when you use one of these or you use a standard IR7, you have to set the station identification number for this station. Now, if you're doing this with a standard IR7, this one, which has the sockets for 8 and 9, and remember, the rule is you cannot double up or duplicate station numbers. So if you have cables plugged into 8 or 9, this station has to be 1 through 7, and you get to pick. Same thing would be true for this. If this is a SubMaster that's being daisy chained off of to another SubMaster, that one you can't duplicate 8 and 9. So if the second SubMaster is 7, this one could be 6, I suppose, or whatever number you chose. And what you're supposed to do is pull this little pin out, has a wire connected to it, and switch it around, and we're going to plug it into 6, which is no easy feat because the wire could be a little longer, but it's not. All right, we'll plug that in eventually. There we go. All right, so now this station is identified as station number 6, which would correspond with the station number 6 switch on the RCM4 master station. As for the rest of this, it's all pretty standard Rittenhouse stuff. You have speaker volume here, and you have your intercom switch here. You have standby, you have radio or phonograph, you have listen and talk. So it's talk and listen, and then you leave it on radio phonograph to hear the music. And standby is the intercom functions can work, but you don't hear the music. So you can hear someone call to you, but you have to switch it over to talk to answer back. So why is this all so complicated? It's all so complicated because this is the type of technology that was available in the 1960s. And we're going to start by, and I think you can see, if I do it this way, so here's all the sockets. And if you look down under the bracket here, what do you see? You see switches and, 1.5 miles of wire. And now let's take a look at the back of an RCM4. So here's the back of our RCM4. Here's our 9 sockets for our 9 remote stations. And here are our 2 sets of A, B, and C sockets for our IR7 or IR7X SubMasters. And you have A, B, and C, and A, B, and C, because remember, the rule is only 2 SubMasters. And again, if you use a standard IR7 SubMaster with the sockets for remote stations 8 and 9, you are not allowed to use socket 8 or 9 here. Also, if you set the pin like we did to identify a SubMaster, say as station number 6, which we did, you're not allowed to use socket number 6 here. So it's complicated. And again, why is it complicated? Well, let me show you. And this will be a little harder to see because it's all buried down inside. But if you look down in here, so here are our sockets. And if you look down in here under the chassis here and all of this. It's a little hard to see, and I can't take it all apart because it's too complicated. Here are the switches. So here on the front are the switches for the 9 remotes plus the entry and the master. And if you could actually see really well, these are the backs of the switches, and then up in here are wiring looms with, instead of 1.5 miles of wire, there's probably 3 miles of wire. So why is this all so complicated? It's also complicated because this is all 1960s technology. 1960s technology, especially early, I'm talking early 1960s, there are no logic circuits. There's no integrated circuits. There isn't any of that more sophisticated stuff that started to become more widely available in the mid and late 1970s. This is all done with switches and wires. And switches and wires make it complicated because it's all, changes are made by moving switches, making and changing connections, and so forth. And that's why you need 3 cables that run between here and a SubMaster to make the SubMaster tie into this unit and correspond with the switches on the front, and then it has switches, and it's very complicated. Unless you actually, I think, installed these from the beginning, it's hard to get a grip on it. And there isn't any way I'm going to build miles of test cables and buy a bunch of vintage equipment and try to put together a system and do all of that. It's complicated. And it's complicated because it's old technology and an old way of thinking about things. But if you have one of these, they are very cool systems, and they're very good sounding systems. And just as an aside, here are some installation instructions for it. One of the things that shows how, here's a wiring layout diagram of how a system is supposed to be installed, which is interesting. It gives you a lot of clues. Things like this always make a lot of sense to me as a former installer. And the other thing which I find really interesting, which shows the dedication and the forward thinking of the Rittenhouse company when they were designing their equipment, is that while most remote stations are IR5s, they're little small stations with 5-inch speaker cones. They did make also IR8s, and IR8s are bigger, like our SubMaster size, that have a big 8-inch speaker with a big magnet on it, so you get better fidelity and better sound. They actually talk about here installation of wiring of remote control stations IR8 and WR9. You can look at that. And there's this really good diagram back here. So what are they showing? Well, what they're showing is, here, it's labeled as room side main listening area. And then this is the wall cavity. And you can see the drawing of the speaker cone. And then on the back side, here on the other side of the wall, it says closet or other open area, opening approximately 11 by 11 or larger. And what they're talking about here is, and I'm going to read this, the large model IR8 speaker may be installed in a standard 4-inch wall in the normal manner. However, the bass response of this wide range, high fidelity speaker may be considerably enhanced where it is possible to vent the wall enclosure to relieve the back pressure on the speaker cone. So this is a classic speaker enclosure topic. Whether it's an intercom system or whether it's a pair of standalone stereo cabinet speakers, they can either be sealed or they can be vented. A sealed speaker enclosure has a different frequency response and a different sound than a vented speaker enclosure. And sometimes in the world of high fidelity home audio, stereo audiophile people, it's sometimes referred to as the East Coast sound and the West Coast sound. The East Coast sound is a sealed enclosure, and the West Coast sound is an open enclosure with a vent. It gets complicated. If you're interested in that, Google it. You'll find out a lot. What they made apparently was And I'm going to read this again. This frequently can be accomplished by locating the speaker in a wall which backs up to a closet or similar area as shown in the opposite drawing. Or the speaker may be vented in a like manner into an adjoining room. The quality of sound radiated from the back of the speaker is not quite equal to that of the front. Highs will be somewhat attenuated, but it is entirely usable and listenable. When this is done, the vent opening should be located directly opposite the back of the speaker as shown in the diagram. For the purpose of covering the wall opening, the grill assembly for an IR8 speaker may be purposed separately, catalog number IR8G for grill. So what they're telling you can do here is you can install a standard 8-inch IR8 speaker, say facing into the master bedroom, but if it's mounted on a wall that's common with the closet, you can cut a hole inside the closet opening wall and mount the fake or faux grill to cover up the hole, because you don't want a hole in your closet wall, and that vents the cavity in the stud space of the wall to give you better sound. Okay, this is a very advanced amount of thinking for design in the early 1960s. No other company that I'm aware of had this kind of concept at all whatsoever. It is somewhat complicated because it's not thinking that's common today, but it was more advanced thinking back in 1961. I hope you found this interesting, and perhaps for someone it will be helpful. If it is, give it a thumbs up, because that helps us just a little bit. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell, and when you click on the bell, click on it to receive all notifications, and every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.